Hello, it is Chris Jurgensen. How are you? This is January 3rd, which means it's the first lesson of the new year. I hope 2022 was an okay year for you. It was okay for me. But now we're in a new year, so I hope it's even better, and I hope my lessons are going to help you become the guitar player that you want to. And that's sort of, one of my goals in putting these lessons together. All right, so you might notice that there's a change of scenery for this lesson, and that's because unlike America, where people sort of go back to work on the second day of January, depending on if it's the weekend or not, in Japan, generally people go back to work the second week of January. So I'm at home because the college where I usually record these videos is closed. And so I brought my stuff home with me, and I'm recording it from my home. My home is in about a half hour from Shibuya in Tokyo, near Kichijoji, which is sort of a fun district as well. So if you ever get to Japan, I hope that you can visit me and I can show you around. Anyways, getting on to this first lesson of the year. If you recall the last lesson, I worked on the turnaround. Now, the turnaround is the last two bars of a blues, and there's different ways to end it. And in the last lesson, I just sort of ended them all the same way. I went like this, which is fine. It's a real standard way of doing it. But I ended all 12 of the turnarounds like that. Just because there's so many different ways to mix and match them that I felt the endings of the turnaround deserve a lesson on its own. So this lesson is called 1 Dozen Finishing Touches for Your Turnarounds. And so we're focusing on the last bar of the turnaround, where as a player you want to really show that you know where that 5 chord is. It doesn't matter what kind of turnaround you're playing. If it's a traditional one, or even one that you sort of play through, you're still going to want to showcase that 5 chord. And so there's a lot of different ways to do it. So I came up with a bunch of them, okay? So let's just get started. The first one just goes like this. And if you notice, this is the root of the G7 chord. This is the flat 7. Now, when I was putting this lesson together, I sort of thought about it a little bit. But if you want like extra credit for this lesson, one thing that you can try to do is you can take that finishing touch for that turnaround and see if you can use that as a motif for the next chord, which would be at the top of the blues progression. And we're in C here, so that's C7. So, for example, maybe you go like this, and then for the C chord, for the F chord, I'm just taking that motif and moving it through, the first couple measures of the blues progression. And, motifs are important because what you're really doing when you play a motif is you play something, you play it again, and the listener picks up on the fact that you're creating a little pattern here, and he assumes that you're going to even do it again. And when you do, whoever's listening feels very happy that he sort of predicted what was going to happen, okay? So let's listen to the first one. Okay, so it's important to remember that what I'm doing is I'm taking the 12 turnarounds from the last lesson and playing them in the exact same order, except I'm adding a new ending to each of them. So the turnaround I played is this one. And the ending. And then what I did is I took that motif and did the same thing for C. And then for the 4 chord. Right, so that's how I did the first one. Let's moving on to the second one. Okay, so the second one, the turnaround is this turnaround. And then the ending I'm doing this time is, there's that 5 chord, right? Right? So let's listen to that and see how we like that one. All right, that was good. So I took that motif, not that you have to do this, but you can. It's a nice exercise. I took that last motif, or that ending for that 5 chord, and since now we're on the G chord, I did the same thing on the G chord. And then I looked for a note in the 1 chord, the C chord. Now there's the 3rd right there. So all together. All right, so that was number 2. Moving on to number 3. All right, for number 3, the turnaround, as I said, is number 3 from the last lesson. And that one just goes like this. And the turnaround that I use is this one, which is totally standard fare, right? There's the G chord, the 5 chord. There's the other 5 chord, right? That, like a D shape looking 5 chord. And now, since that's my motif, I can do the same thing for the 1 chord when it comes around to the top. Right? So let's listen to that. All right, so again, I took the motif and I moved it to the 1 chord. Sort of like Red House, right? Okay, next, moving on to number 4. All right, so number 4 is just a variation on number 3. Now the turnaround is this one. And instead of going like this, I'm doing a little double stop thing. And so, again, if I wanted to use this motif to for the next measure, since we're on G, I go to G, and there's the third and the flat seventh of the C chord, okay? There's different ways to do it, of course, but this is just one way. Okay, so that was a good one. That was number 4. Let's move on to number 5. Number 5, so the turnaround is this. And so I'm going to continue on with this sort of motif for the last measure too, and I'm going to go like this. And we do that sometimes for the turnaround. Instead of playing, sometimes we'll play or, and so it's really to sound like an A flat 7 or an A flat 9 going to a G7 or a G9, and that's perfectly fine. So now, how would, if I'm going to use this motif and continue on, what would I do? Maybe I go like this, because there's that C chord, right? All right, so let's listen to that one. Okay, good. So that was number 5. Let's move on to number 6. Okay, moving on to the next one, number 6. I'm taking the last turnaround, and it's a little bit of a variation, which I like a lot because the intervals are a little bit different and not all parallel intervals. And for an ending, I'm playing this. That's from the C, right? From the G. And if I wanted to continue on, I could go like this. There's G, C. Okay, so let's listen to that. All right, so next we're moving on to number 7. Let's check that one out. Okay, so the turnaround is this turnaround. And I'm ending it by going, right, there's the C. And that's the root of the G chord. If you bend it a little bit, it sounds more like blues. All right, so let's check that one out. Okay, that was number 7. Moving on to number 8. Yeah, okay, so number 8, I'm taking a variation on the turnaround. And then for the turnaround, for the ending of the turnaround, I'm going to go. That's just that G chord. I'm really sort of ignoring the C chord a little bit here, but that's okay. All right, so let's try that one. Okay, moving on to number 9. So now we're moving into 3 moving parts here. This turnaround goes like this. And for the turnaround, for the ending, I'm using, it's sort of a flashy one. Like a country thing, right? And that's like a G chord, right? If I wanted to use this motif, I could go like this maybe. And then you'd have the sound of the C chord, okay? So let's have a listen. Okay, let's move on to number 10. Number 10 is that, again, that variation from the last one, but with that C note on top. This is a nice sounding turnaround, I think. And the ending is a variation on the last one. But I go a little crazy. That's the 5th and the flat 7 of G, right? I could keep going for the C. Right? It's a good sound. It's kind of interesting. You don't hear so many players do that one. Let's check it out. good. That was a nice one. Let's go on to number 11. Okay, so for number 11 here, the first half is really like a traditional old school turnaround. This one. It's a beautiful turnaround because it's got contrary motion, right? You got... And on the top, you got that C note the whole time. But how I finished this up for this one is not traditional at all. This is something that is a pretty unique way of approaching the last half of the turnaround. And it's just a Barry Harris minor 6 diminished idea. I talk about this a lot. I don't want to get really into the weeds too much, but for the G chord, Barry would say you can use D minor 6th diminished scale harmony. And so in that situation, you get basically a series of D minor 6 chords and diminished chords, right? That's usually what you get. And then you can put that right over that G7 chord and it creates a nice little movement. But what I do is I borrow from the diminished chords rather than playing the whole diminished chord. So now that looks like that looks like G9, right? And we're playing over like a G9. But this is really also a D minor 6 chord. The next chord looks like a diminished chord. But I'm just borrowing the top and the bottom notes while leaving the 2 middle notes from that G chord, that D minor 6 chord. These two. Now this is D minor 6 again. And again, from this diminished chord, I borrow the top and the bottom. So, and that leads us right up to the C9, which is the 1 chord. So this is really an interesting way. Now, this is if it's confusing, get the PDF or go back to some of my other lessons and learn more about this kind of thing. But I really like this sound. So I think this is like a really interesting, traditional, but sounding, but not really traditional way of approaching that, the end of the turnaround. Give it a shot. I think it's a good one myself. All right, so we're finishing up with number 12 here. The turnaround section, part of this turnaround, is really like a lot of different moving parts. Right? And for the ending, I think this is a great thing too. Now, what the hell is that? So, when you play this voicing like this, over the G chord, there's the G note. I don't expect you to hold it, but this is a G altered chord. It's got a sharp 9 and a sharp 5. it really creates tension for that G chord that it just wants to resolve to the 1 chord. But here's the cool part, and this is one of my favorite tricks. If you move down a half step and change the root to C, it becomes C13. It's sort of, to me, sounds like what like a horn section would do. There's not a lot. The notes are just moving down in a half step, all of them, except for the root, and it's such a great sound. I really do this a lot, especially on the slower blues. You got to be careful that you're playing in a trio, because you don't know what the piano player or the other guitar player is going to play at all. But if you have a little bit of freedom to play around with the harmony, this is a great one. Okay, so let's listen to it. All right, so there you have it. 12 turnarounds matched with 12 great endings for these turnarounds, okay? Are these all of them? I don't know. You got to figure that out on your own. I guarantee that it isn't. I guarantee there's a lot more that you could play. But, that's part of the fun of the whole thing, right? So if you need the PDF, go get it. It's on Patreon. That'll wind up our 2-part lesson on turnarounds. So I hope you enjoyed this lesson coming from my humble abode in Kichijoji in Western Tokyo. So I want to introduce you to somebody that deserves special credit for this lesson. Just wait 1 second. Here she is. It's Dee Dee. She's my cat. She's a rescue cat. She's such a beautiful, lovely creature. And I wanted to give her a special thanks for sleeping through this entire lesson right next to me without meowing or going crazy or doing anything. She was very well behaved. So let's say a special thank you to Dee Dee.